Welcome to the deep dive. We occasionally come across a set of sources that just perfectly capture how massive global shockwaves can just crash right into everyday local politics.
Yeah, it's honestly a fascinating intersection. We're looking at a scenario today where a conflict halfway across the globe almost instantly changes the cost of living and the national security of a country.
Right, and all while that exact same country is trying to manage some pretty severe internal crises of its own.
Exactly. It's a lot of moving parts.
So to understand how all these pieces fit together, our main source material today is an official opposition bulletin from the Sri Lankan Parliament. And this covers their proceedings from March 3rd through the 6th, 2026. The mission of this deep dive for you listening is to basically unpack this really dense political document. We want to see how a nation navigates international naval conflicts, major economic hurdles, and sweeping legal reform just all at once.
Before we really get into the weeds, though, I think it's vital we lay out some ground rules for our analysis today.
Oh, absolutely. Good call.
The document we are unpacking, it was written by the Parliamentary opposition of Sri Lanka. So naturally, it contains highly specific, highly politically charged narratives and accusations aimed at the current government.
Right. It has an agenda.
Exactly. And our role here is purely analytical. We are going to objectively explore the ideas, the claims, the arguments presented in this text so we can understand the opposition's perspective.
But we aren't taking sides.
No, absolutely not. We aren't endorsing any of these viewpoints or taking any political stance. We're just looking at what the text says.
That's a crucial distinction. Okay, so here's the roadmap for our journey today. We're going to start with a literal geopolitical explosion right off the coast of Sri Lanka.
A very dramatic start.
It really is. Then we'll pivot to the domestic front, looking at the fallout from a deadly cyclone and a staggering national energy controversy.
Then we'll get into the opposition's warnings about emergency laws threatening civil liberties.
Yeah, and finally, we'll spend some time going over a 12-point blueprint for democratic reform that they've put forward to try and fix all these systemic issues.
It's a massive agenda. I think the most logical place to start is, well, segment 1, global shockwaves on local shores.
Let's do it. The bulletin kicks off with this incredibly serious claim about a military strike. The opposition details an attack by the U.S. and Israel on Iran, but they focus heavily on how this conflict spilled directly into Sri Lankan waters.
Right. They claim an Iranian naval vessel was torpedoed and sunk by an American submarine.
And not just anywhere. The text says this happened merely 40 to 44 nautical miles off the coast of Gali.
Which is a major port city in the south of Sri Lanka.
Right. And the context here, which is laid out by MP Mujibur Rahman, it just adds so many layers of complexity to this.
It does, because this Iranian ship, it wasn't just randomly passing through the Indian Ocean. It had literally just finished participating in a 74-country naval exercise hosted over in India.
And Sri Lanka was part of that exercise too, right?
Yes. Sri Lanka's own naval vessel, the SLNS Nandamitra, was participating in that exact same joint exercise.
So these ships were operating right alongside each other just before this incident.
Exactly. Which raises huge questions. If the exercise was over, why was the Iranian ship lingering near Gali? Why not just go home?
Right. And the narrative in the bulletin says the Iranian vessel couldn't safely return to the Gulf because of the escalating conflict over there.
So it anchored near Gali and officially requested permission to enter the port.
But the Sri Lankan government denied them entry.
According to the opposition, yes. They say this denial triggered an 11-hour standoff.
11 hours just sitting there.
Yeah. The ship was stuck in this limbo for nearly half a day. And then the U.S. military, which had apparently dispatched a sub from the Gulf, executed the torpedo strike.
Wow. And the bulletin also mentions the second point of tension, right? Another Iranian ship is reportedly anchored near the Colombo port.
Yes, well within Sri Lanka's maritime boundary, so the tension is extremely high.
And the opposition is furious. They are forcefully demanding that the government condemn the attack. They bring up historical precedent, pointing out Iran's long-standing support for Sri Lanka, especially during their 30-year civil war.
But the government has been totally silent on the matter.
Completely silent. One MP even sarcastically asked if the U.S. ambassador, Julie Chung, had somehow, quote, neutralized the president's radical spirit.
It's a pointed jab. But the underlying insight here, if you read between the lines of the bulletin, is the incredible vulnerability of smaller nations caught between superpowers.
Right, because Sri Lanka is currently relying on complex economic bailouts.
Exactly. They are in deep negotiations with Western-backed financial institutions like the IMF. So the government's silence on an American attack against an Iranian ship might not be about moral conviction.
It's a survival tactic.
Yeah. It's a calculated move to avoid upsetting the Western financial entities that hold the keys to their economic recovery.
And that economic survival is basically the thread that ties this whole bulletin together. The opposition connects this naval incident straight to the wallets of everyday Sri Lankan citizens.
Because of the Strait of Hormuz?
Right. They warn that if the Strait of Hormuz closes due to this conflict, it's a disaster.
For those who might not know, the Strait of Hormuz is one of the most critical shipping bottlenecks on the planet. If it closes, global shipping has to reroute all the way around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa.
Which adds weeks to the transit times.
Weeks of travel, which means massive price spikes for fuel and gas arriving in Sri Lanka.
And on the flip side, it crushes their export economy. The bulletin notes how shipping and air freight costs for vital goods like tea and coconuts would just skyrocket.
But beyond just the cargo, the opposition heavily emphasizes the human cost.
The workers in the Middle East?
Yes, there are hundreds of thousands of Sri Lankan citizens working there. The opposition argues their physical safety is on the line, and crucially, their remittances are threatened.
And those remittances are a huge pillar of Sri Lanka's foreign exchange reserves.
It really paints a picture of how fast a distant war can destabilize a local economy. And this is all happening while the country is facing huge internal crises.
Which brings us to segment 2, the domestic front. Let's pivot from global shipping lanes to local climate and energy disasters.
Starting with the aftermath of Cyclone 𝗦𝗦𝗕𝗏.
The bulletin is stark here. It's been 3 months since the cyclone hit, and the opposition says 40,000 families are still completely homeless.
Plus another 150,000 people displaced, basically couch surfing with relatives.
And over 1,000 families are stuck in 32 temporary safe locations. The opposition goes hard after the government here for failing to convene a proper international donor conference.
They argue that some basic, timely diplomatic outreach could have brought in the aid these people desperately need.
But instead of securing aid, the opposition claims the government is actually actively mismanaging national funds, specifically in the energy sector.
This is the coal controversy. The bulletin cites a Public Utilities Commission report detailing a massive financial loss.
Wait, let me get the number right. It was 8,497 million rupees.
Nearly 8.5 billion rupees, yes. Lost due to the importation of 9 vessels of substandard coal.
8.5 billion. That is a staggering loss, especially when you just talked about a lack of funds for cyclone victims. How does bad coal cause an 8.5 billion rupee problem?
Well, the financial hit is just part of it. The bulletin highlights the operational and environmental disaster this caused. This low-quality coal was meant for the 𝗏𝗏𝗕𝗏 power plant.
And because it's substandard, burning it creates heavy black smoke.
Exactly. The opposition details how this is causing severe environmental damage and health risks for the people living in the 𝗏𝗏𝗕𝗏 area.
And the text specifically notes that women in the region are bearing the brunt of these health impacts. Right.
It does. It shows how top-down infrastructure failures almost always hit the local vulnerable communities the hardest.
Which perfectly segues into another massive debate in the bulletin, the Microfinance and Credit Regulatory Authority Bill.
This is a fascinating section.
The opposition claims the government is just ramming this bill through to secure a $200 million loan from the Asian Development Bank.
But their stance on the bill itself is incredibly nuanced. The opposition isn't just saying, oh, all regulation is bad.
No, not at all. Several MPs actually point out how devastating unregulated, predatory lending has been. They cite some really tragic statistics about thousands of people losing their lives to suicide because they were trapped by ruthless, high-interest lenders outside the formal banking system.
So usually when you hear about predatory lending, a regulatory bill sounds like a great solution.
Right, so why is the opposition fighting this specific bill so hard?
Because they argue it targets the wrong people. They claim the bill is structurally flawed and will basically outlaw the community-based, women-centered cooperative lending models that actually help people.
These local cooperatives have been around since the 90s, right?
Yes. The bulletin mentions they are built on the concept of 𝗦𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏.
Let's define that for the listener. 𝗦𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 essentially means strength of the people. It's a traditional Sri Lankan welfare philosophy focused on village-level economic self-reliance rather than corporate banking.
Spot on. These cooperatives empower low-income earners through mutual community support. But this new regulatory authority would force these small village groups to meet rigid, formal banking standards.
Which they obviously can't do.
Right, so it effectively crushes them. Meanwhile, And this is the kicker. The MPs point out that large profit-driven corporate banks are inexplicably left totally unregulated by this specific bill.
So the argument is that the government is using the guise of consumer protection to destroy local community lifelines while letting corporate lenders off the hook.
That's the claim. And that theme, the government using a crisis to grab power and restrict citizens, leads us right into segment 3, the threat to civil liberties.
This is where things take a turn toward warnings of creeping authoritarianism. The bulletin dives into the government's use of emergency powers.
So after 𝗙𝗧𝗏𝗕𝗏 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗏, the government extended emergency regulations.
Which, on the surface, makes sense. You need emergency powers to clear roads and manage logistics after a natural disaster.
But the opposition claims there's a hidden secret behind this extension. They accuse the government of weaponizing the disaster as a legal pretext to suppress labor rights.
How do they do that?
By using the emergency law to designate a bunch of public sectors as, quote, essential services. The bulletin lists electricity, hospitals, passenger transport, water supply, and food distribution.
And when you legally classify a sector as an essential service under these specific emergency rules, you basically strip the workers of their right to strike.
Exactly. It bans trade union action. These emergency regulations legally override normal civil and labor protections.
And the penalties the text outlines are terrifying. We're not just talking about getting fired if you don't show up to work.
No. An employee could face 2 to 5 years in prison simply for not reporting to their shift.
2 to 5 years.
Plus, the government can legally confiscate their personal property. And if the worker has a professional license, say a doctor or an engineer, their registration can be permanently revoked.
It's extreme. The opposition's thesis here is that these draconian penalties have absolutely nothing to do with cyclone recovery. It's just a tool to permanently ban strikes and intimidate the workforce.
It really is a grim picture they're painting. A government failing to protect its waters, mismanaging cyclone relief, losing billions on dirty coal, and threatening ordinary workers with prison time.
But, and this is crucial, the bulletin doesn't just complain. They actually dedicate a massive portion of the text to a roadmap for fixing these things.
Yes, segment 4, a blueprint for reform.
The opposition outlines something they call the Thursday Dialogue. It was a panel of legal and electoral experts who put together a 12-point plan for democratic reform.
And what's interesting here is how practical these proposals are. They are trying to clear out systemic bottlenecks that have frustrated citizens for decades.
Let's break down some of the biggest points, starting with electoral reform. The panel is pushing hard for advance voting.
This ties right back to those essential workers we just talked about. Right now, Sri Lanka relies on a single voting day.
So if you're a nurse or a transit worker or a journalist and you have to be at work to keep the country running, you essentially lose your constitutional right to vote.
Right. Advance voting would ensure that civic participation isn't just a privilege for people with flexible schedules.
Another massive change they propose involves the Attorney General's department. As it stands, the Attorney General has 2 jobs. They're the chief legal advisor to the government, but they are also the state's public prosecutor.
The experts point out what a glaring conflict of interest this is. How can you impartially prosecute a corrupt state official when your main job is to advise and protect the state?
You can't.
Exactly. So the reform proposes legally splitting those roles. Create a fully independent public prosecution office so trials happen without political interference.
They also focus heavily on decentralizing justice. Right now, if a citizen's constitutional rights are violated, they have to file a fundamental rights case at the Supreme Court.
Which is located in the capital, Colombo.
Right. So if you live in a rural province, the cost of traveling to the capital, staying there, hiring Colombo-based lawyers, it makes justice virtually inaccessible.
It's a huge geographic barrier. The 12-point plan says these cases should be heard at provincial high courts. Bring constitutional protection to the local level.
They propose the same thing for property disputes by creating local land tribunals. Skip the years of expensive district court litigation and just solve everyday property issues locally.
That theme of decentralization is huge in this blueprint. They also call for repealing the Online Safety Act, which they say restricts free expression and gives the government too much control over digital communication.
And they take direct aim at the 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗏 Authority.
For context, the 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗏 Authority was originally set up to manage major river basin and agricultural projects.
But the experts say it has totally overstepped. Even after projects are finished, the authority keeps this sweeping control over the land. They override local zoning, which causes massive land rights issues for thousands of farmers.
The plan proposes reining them in and giving land management back to local jurisdictions.
And the final piece of the puzzle. To make sure these local voices actually matter nationally, the experts suggest adding a second chamber to the parliament.
Specifically modeled after India's Rajya Sabha.
The upper house.
Right. Historically, there's always been friction between the central government in Colombo and the provincial councils. A second chamber would give the provinces an institutional role in making national laws.
So the central government couldn't just dictate policy without provincial consent.
Exactly. It's a complete rewiring of the state machinery.
It really is. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into this bulletin. Let's bring this all back to you, the listener. What this document shows us is just how delicate a modern nation's balancing act truly is. A country has to somehow juggle foreign submarines having standoffs near its ports, billion-rupee energy blenders poisoning the air, and ensuring a citizen can cast a ballot or join a union without facing prison time.
To synthesize everything we've looked at today, the opposition has laid out a narrative of compounding crises. They see a government failing on its borders, its economy, and its democratic norms.
But they also brought receipts on how to fix it.
Yes, they paired the criticism with a very structured blueprint to decentralize power and increase access to justice.
It's a lot to chew on, but I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. This bulletin proves that local and global issues aren't separate anymore.
They are completely intertwined.
Right. If a local cyclone can be used as a legal excuse to permanently alter national labor rights, and a distant conflict in the Middle East can instantly spike your local energy prices and threaten your national security, where does a country's true sovereignty actually reside?
That is the big question.
Does power still lie in the hands of the voters and the local communities, or is a modern nation just constantly at the mercy of the next unavoidable global shockwave?
It's a very complex reality to navigate.
It certainly is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives around you, look past the surface level, and we'll catch you next time.